Hi everybody. This is our first day working with poetry and our first day in our poetry unit. We are going to be reviewing mostly today some basics that you should have learned before just to get them fresh in your mind about poetry. And obviously I understand, especially as 7th graders, that you do not enjoy poetry, and I get it. I was in your same boat when I was your age. I hated poetry. I thought it was boring. I didn't get it. It was stupid. But I'm hoping that I can at least help you understand it and maybe even possibly respect or appreciate it, because poetry really is amazing. And I would even argue that you all listen to poetry almost every day. And by that I mean music, and song lyrics, right? So the rappers that you listen to, they're rapping poetry. The song lyrics you listen to, I would argue that that is also poetry that they're singing, right? And I'll kind of explain this more as we go, but already you have at least somewhat of an appreciation for poetry. You just didn't realize it before. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I want you guys to understand is what is poetry, and the one we're really going to focus on is this first one right here. So poetry is a type of literature that expresses emotion, feelings, and ideas with special intensity through the use of rhythm and style. So it has to be intense because for the most part poetry is short, right? And it has to leave a lasting impression. And the use of silent rhythm is what makes poetry, right? So poetry structure is made up of 3 things: meter, stanza, and rhyme scheme. These are the basic building blocks of what makes poetry for the most part. Especially these first 2. Rhyme scheme, we will see how it plays a role in it, but it's almost somewhat not too important, okay? But mostly we're going to be focusing on these 2 as the most important. So to begin with, we have a meter, and meter is patterns of stressed and unstressed syllables. So when you all were in, I don't know, elementary school and you were learning what syllables were, right? You would clap along with the word. So for example, meter has 2 syllables, and we know this because when we clap, meter, we clap twice, and that's 2 syllables. My last name, Tilford is 2 syllables. Poetry is 3, poetry. So those syllables can be stressed or unstressed, and they form a pattern, which is what gives us rhythm and melody for the poem. And that's really what makes poetry, because if we don't have a rhythm or a melody, then it's just some words on a page with some weird formatting, right? And another way of looking at it is think of your heartbeat, right? Your heartbeat, it could be a certain type of meter, right? I have a YouTube video that I want you to watch that I think will explain this a little bit better. So let's go ahead and skip this ad.
#1 pediatrician recommended brand.
And watch the YouTube video. Oh, wait a second. I don't want that. We'll start from the beginning. There we go.
Meter in poetry, a la shmup. Alright, so if we told you to watch out for iambs, trochees, spondees, anapests, and dactyls, you might cover your head with your hands and run screaming for the nearest shelter, hoping against hope that none of them are hungry. But in fact, these fantastic 5 are nothing more than types of poetic feet. And those feet? Well, they help add rhythm and meter to a line of poetry. Oh yeah, it's not just jazz musicians who need to lay down a funky beat. Poetry is big on beauty and ideas and feelings, sure, but in many cases it also relies on meter to evoke a certain response from the reader. See how that rhymes? During poetry's humble beginnings, meter was introduced not so much to make poems sing-songy, but to simply help remember the dang things.
You live briefly when make mammoth angry.
Which is easier to remember what you need to get at a grocery store? A list like this? Or a poem like this? The milk is gone and yogurt too. I need some Dawn and a new shampoo. We're low on rye, the eggs are out. Could use some pie and sauerkraut. Catchy, no? It's not just because the poem rhymes, because there is was a natural flow, a rhythm to the words. Let's take a look at a version of our shopping poem that is lacking in rhythm. Milk is gone, and somebody polished off the last of the yogurt, too. I need to get some Dawn and shampoo. We're running low on our rye. The eggs were eaten this morning, and so they're just about out. Since we don't have any dessert on hand, it would be nice to stock up on pie, and we should also probably get sauerkraut. It still rhymes, but like yikes. Probably not something you'd see come out of a poet laureate. Meter is absent in free verse poetry, but there is still rhythm. Not every line needs to have a certain number of syllables, and you can switch up where you stress certain words. But even free verse makes you feel as if there is some kind of music infused into the language. Try playing around with meter yourself and see what happens. If all else fails, at least you won't run out of sauerkraut.
All right, so that kind of gives us a more of a basic understanding of what meter is, right? But it is essential to poetry. Next, we're going to talk about what stanza is, and a stanza basically is set up like paragraphs in an essay, and they all have connecting ideas or topics. So just like we have an introductory paragraph, the body paragraphs, and a conclusion paragraph in an essay, each of those paragraphs focuses on a specific topic that you're trying to cover in the essay, but all of those topics are connected. And it's the same idea with stanzas in poetry. While each stanza is unique with its own topic or concept, they're all connected based off of the same overall idea. And these can be arranged by rhythm or meter, or if it's blank verse, however blank verse decides, right? So stanza is another one of the main building blocks for poetry. It kind of helps us organize how the poem is read. Next, we're going to get into rhyme scheme. And rhyme scheme is a pattern that controls how the rhymes are organized in a poem. It controls how the poem flows and determines the overall organization of the poem, especially with like poems that have a specific way that the rhyme scheme is structured. They can bring balance or unbalance to a stanza, and they reinforce feelings or ideas the author is trying to express, right? So it's just another literary tool that helps the author get their point across in a new way. And rhyme scheme, some examples just to give you an idea. Depending on how it rhymes, and by that I mean if it's an internal rhyme, a slant rhyme, I rhyme, perfect rhyme, etc., it will have some kind of patterns, whether it's A B A B, A B B A, A B C D, and that'll make more sense here in a second. But before we move on to the pattern, let's talk about the types of rhymes that we have. So internal rhyme occurs in the middle of a line of poetry. And an example of this is, I drove myself to the lake and dove into the water. So drove and dove rhyme, but they rhyme in the middle of in the middle of the poetry line instead of at the end, right, where it could be end rhyme. Slant rhyme is where words that almost rhyme but not completely, and we see this a lot in rap music. And I'm sure you can think of a million examples of slant rhyme in rap. So an example would be, hope is a thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings a tune without the words and never stops at all. So soul and all almost sound like they rhyme, but they don't quite rhyme, and that's what makes it a slant rhyme. I rhyme are words that look like they should rhyme, but they don't. So I take it you already know of tough and buff and cough and dough. Others may stumble, but not you, on I don't really know how to pronounce that. Haiku, hiku, through, low and, or thorough and through. So those words, dough, cough, tough, bow, whatever that says, those look like they should rhyme because they all have a similar spelling, but they don't. Same thing with here. The O-U-G-H makes a different sound for each different word. So the I rhyme looks like they should rhyme, but they don't actually rhyme. And then finally we have perfect rhyme, and those are words that match exactly. An example is, and they all went to college to get more knowledge. Knowledge and college are the perfect rhyme here, the perfect rhyme scheme. So going back to this idea of the pattern of ABA, ABB, let me give you an example. So I picked two poems here to show you what I'm talking about when I say rhyme scheme pattern. This is what I mean. And here on this turning of the stair between passion and doubt, I pause and say a double prayer, one for you and one for you, and so they cancel out. So, stare and prayer, they match, so those are our two A's. Doubt and out match, and those are our two B's. So our rhyme scheme pattern is A, B, A, B. So the two B's match and the two A's match, essentially. And it's easier to find these patterns when there's a rhyme at the end of the sentence. So stare and prayer match, doubt and out match. And it can be a little bit more difficult when we get into the other rhyme scheme types. Another example would be, a word is dead when it is said. Some say, I say, it just begins to live that day. So these first two lines rhyme, so that would be our two A's, dead and said. And then finally, say and day, those match, those are our two B's. And if you're a little confused on this part, that's okay. It's going to be confusing until you really see it in action. So don't be too discouraged if you are kind of confused, because we'll talk about this more as we go. Finally, I want to call your attention to some very common types of poetry that we will work with in this unit, and obviously I will tell you what kind of poem we're going to be reading with each of the 5 that I pointed out to you earlier, but here are the common types. Blank verse, which has a precise meter. Remember, that's what gives the poem the flow, but it doesn't have any rhythm. So blank verse just means it sounds like it flows together, but there really isn't any rhyme there. I'm sorry, there's no rhyme, not rhythm. Free verse lacks a consistent rhyme scheme, and there is no meter pattern. So free verse is just all over the place. Epics are lengthy poems that tell a story. They're usually about an adventure from the past, and what sets these apart from like a short story or a novel is because they are set to a meter and they usually have a rhyme scheme. Haiku, I told you before that rhymes with rhyme scheme, it can determine the overall organization of a poem, and this is one of those instances where rhyme scheme does that. So haiku has 3-line poetry, or 3 lines of poetry that originated in Japan, and it has a very specific structure. So as far as meter goes, so line 1 has 5 syllables exactly, line 2 has 7 syllables, and line 3 has 5 syllables. So that's the structure of the haiku, and that's what makes it a haiku, having this 5-7-5 structure with the 3-line poetry. There are sonnets, and Shakespeare is extremely well known for writing sonnets. It's a 14-line poem, again, very specific on the stanza structure and the meter structure. And it's usually over a topic of love, and it uses internal rhyme more than any other kind of rhyme scheme. And finally, we have lyrical, which is a broad category that covers emotions and feelings that's set to a specific meter. So again, with this one, I would say that you think of music, especially with this one, right? So this kind of concludes our brief recap of poetry basics. If you're feeling a little more confused than what you thought you would, that's okay. Again, we're going to be working with this for the rest of this unit. So if this stuff doesn't make any sense to you now, don't fret. There will come a time where it does. I'm really excited for this unit, guys, and I know it's going to be like pulling teeth, but I promise if you stick with me, we will get through this together. So have a wonderful day. I will see you in our Zoom call.